Listen, baby, you can always find an excuse to not make your art. There's always going to be more excuses, just like there's always more work to do. If you've been avoiding it, you got to say, that's because I'm not prioritizing myself. For some reason, I don't think I'm worth it. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Hello Hayes. Specifically, welcome to our very first episode of our creative process series. As it sounds, we're going to talk about the creative process. This is one of my favorite topics of conversation with friends. When I get to learn about other people's creative processes, it really lights me up from the inside. And I was so excited when I asked my Instagram and YouTube audience the other day what questions they have about the creative process, about writing, and the feelings that can come up during all of that. I got so many incredible thought-provoking questions that I'm itching to answer. And what I realized when I was analyzing the questions to try to, structure the episode is that this is bigger than one episode. Your questions spanned so many parts of the creative process, and I decided, you know what? I'm going to make this into a series. And right now it looks like it's going to be a four-part series. So in our first part of our series, which is today, episode 1, baby, we're going to talk about getting started. We're going to cover everything from where do ideas come from and how to spark inspiration. We're going to talk about self-recognition and seeing ourselves as the writers and artists that we actually are. And then we're going to talk about being seen by others, because that is tricky and that can be a huge impediment to actually getting started. So let's start with the spark. We're going to talk about idea generation and just getting started. So the first question somebody wrote to me, and I loved how some of you actually started these questions with Hello Hayes. You're so cute and I frickin' love you. Okay. I have more than a few ideas for projects I want to start, but I've always struggled with putting pen to paper. It feels like I can never flesh out an idea enough to justify working on it. I want to get these ideas out into the world, but it seems daunting and honestly really difficult. Do you have any advice on starting seemingly big projects and making them more manageable? I love this. There's so many juicy parts of this question to tackle. I think the first piece I want to tackle is this concept of you have to flesh out an idea to justify working on it. Your ideas don't need to be justified to earn your time. Ideas don't even really want to be justified. Ideas just want to be seen. Ideas want to be entertained. And sometimes that's actually all you have to do to get started. One of the things I love about the book Big Magic, and I'll probably end up quoting Big Magic throughout all of these episodes, is she talks about how ideas just want your attention, just like any kind of living thing. They want your attention. And when you give the idea your attention, it gives rewards back to you. But if you can't begin your creative process by trying to justify every idea that comes into your head. An idea is justified simply because it exists, simply because it's yours, simply because it came into your brain. The idea that something has to be fleshed out enough to continue working on it, that's such a school-based academic or corporate mindset that I think so many of us have been brought up in, that we should only pursue an idea if it has good, strong roots, and if we have a plan, and if there's going to be a clear benefit at the end, if you're going to get a clear ROI. I don't think creative ideas require that. And in fact, if that's all you're looking for, none of your ideas nothing will ever get started, because none of your ideas will want to come to you. It's you need to create a safe space for your ideas. You don't want to be the boss to your idea. The boss that everybody hates because you never feel like you can raise your hand and suggest something, because they're always going to point out the 10 different ways that it'll never work and that it's not good for the business and yada, yada. Don't be that person to your ideas. Entertain the bad ideas, and don't even call them good or bad. Whether or not they're worth it in the end isn't the point. So that's one thing I want you to start practicing. And I think you're right. Getting your ideas out into the world can feel daunting and difficult. But the difficulty, I wish it was different, but the difficulty is part of the process. It is going to be difficult. Creativity, making things, listening to yourself, taking risks, doing things without ever getting anything in return, that is difficult. But I think when we start to see difficult as part of the process rather than a scary possible outcome, we just learn to expect it a little bit more. I do think there are ways, though, where we can make it less daunting. The biggest mistake I see people make, and that I've made myself, and that I still make sometimes, is to focus too much on the end goal of the idea before we start the beginning. I have this idea for a novel. Now I need to start this idea so that I can publish it and become the next great fantasy writer and XYZ. Of course, you're going to feel overwhelmed. You're standing at the bottom of a mountain looking up and it feels like your dreams are on the other side, yet you have no Sherpa and you have no person to lead you up Everest. That is scary and daunting. So I would encourage you not to think about the end, actually. The first step when you have an idea is what's like the fastest way that I can get this idea out of my head and onto something. That could mean taking out your iPhone and you're opening up your notes app and like writing down a summary of the idea. If you don't have an ideas list on your phone, I think that's such a great thing to have. I really suck at organization, so my notes app is a mess and there's like many different ideas, notes, folders going on. But if you don't have that yet, do that. Like make it so that it's really easy for you, no matter where you are, to capture things that are going on in your brain, because then that in and of itself becomes a process. You get used to listening to things that are happening in your head and putting them out on paper. What you put on paper doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to make sense. It's just the act of documenting what it is that's happening inside your head. I think the other piece that feels daunting about getting started with a creative idea is that we think our ideas have to be good, or like our execution of the idea has to be good. And it doesn't. Like, listen, I'll admit, like there is nothing better than having an idea and watching yourself figure out how to make it right. The feeling of figuring out a creative problem on paper, or if I'm editing a video and like, I don't know, I feel like it's not going to work. And then all of a sudden it does, something clicks. That is one of the greatest feelings ever. However, right next to that, honestly, another great feeling is just having done the work. You don't need to reread everything you write. You don't need to watch it. You don't need to look at it. I promise you that if you get in the habit of just giving yourself time to express your ideas, you will feel so satisfied and so proud of yourself for having done that. It doesn't matter whether it's good or not. It doesn't matter whether it was an accurate representation of what actually was in your head. Because the truth is, it probably never is going to be as good as what's in your head at first or second or third or fourth. It takes, at least for me, it takes a really long time and a lot of revision to get the idea that's in my head to make it as good as in paper. Ann Patchett has a great line where she dreams up her novels and she spends months and months and months thinking about her novels, thinking about the story in her head before she ever begins. And then as soon as she starts writing, she kills the idea. The idea is dead as soon as she starts because she realizes that she can't get what was in her head out onto paper. And then she begins again. That's part of her process. That's part of my process, and it might be part of your process. Your ideas don't have to be good. Remove that from the equation. All your idea has to do is exist. And then you, as the person containing it, you have the responsibility to give it space to breathe. Give it space to exist outside of your head. Let it live on the page. And then you'll see what happens. Maybe that will be enough. Like there's a chance that maybe just writing the idea down, giving yourself an hour to journal about it, to come up with something that makes no sense, like that might be enough for the next idea to come. Another question is, I love the idea of writing, but never know what to write about. Do you have any thoughts? What I want you to know about writing is that writing really is an act of listening. If you don't know what you want to write about, the first thing I want you to do is to start being a better listener of what's happening in your brain. Because our brain is going all day long, and there are plenty of things in there that are worthy of you to document, to write down, to riff on. But you have to pay attention to it. And I think for good reason, or just because we're out of practice, sometimes we're not really listening to what's going on inside of our head. We might listen and then we might jump out because we're like, that's kind of boring, or I don't really want to go there. Well, what happens if you stay there? What happens if you listen a little bit longer? You ask yourself questions inside your head. And I think writing is better. The best writing comes from people, I think, who really listen to themselves and are comfortable spending a lot of time there. That requires silence and deep reflection. And I think the more you listen, the more ideas you have. Now, it's another thing. It's like, well, are my ideas interesting? Doesn't matter if they're interesting. Doesn't matter if they're interesting yet. First, I just want you to really get in the habit of paying attention to what's going on in your head and trying to translate that out onto the page. I think more tactically, one of my favorite workbooks, The Artist's Way, it's sort of like an 8-week workbook where there's a chapter that'll kind of inspire you and teach you a new thing about your creative journey and your artistic self. And then it gives you activities to do. I've done it twice now, and I'm now going to do it a third time. The first was in 2020. The second was in 2023. And now 2 years later, I'm going to begin again. There's also, in every week, there are a few consistent activities. One of them is called the morning pages. The author is Julia Cameron, and she says that every morning she wants you to handwrite 3 full pages, just getting the gunk out of your brain. Just get the gunk out. It's almost like rusting off the wheels, or I don't know if that's the right phrase, but just getting the gunk out is what I like to say. And sometimes when you just get the gunk out, you start to realize there's little seeds of ideas in there. You could start by doing that. Like if you want to write, but you don't know what to write about, start just by getting the gunk out of your brain. When I look back on my Artist's Way pages from the previous years, sometimes it's literally, I write, I don't know what to write about. That feels so frustrating. When I don't know what to write about, it makes me feel stupid and boring and like I'm never going to be able to achieve my dreams. What are some of my dreams? Well, a current dream I have is that I want to whatever. Stream of consciousness, go. And you don't need to reread that, but from those trains of thoughts, you might have an idea. Another exercise that you might try is to think about an interaction you had that felt good, an interaction you had that didn't feel so good, and try to write it. Try to write it as a scene. Maybe something happened at work that you wish you handled differently, or you wish someone else handled it differently. Write the scene the way that you wish it would have gone. Imagine what would have happened had the events gone differently, had the person said something different. You could take that could be a fun exercise to try. Another idea that just popped into my head, you could go to any of my old advice videos or my Substack and read one of the advice letters and write your own advice response. You can see the way that I structured my letter and see what stories you might use from your own life instead of the ones that I chose. I think when you're learning to write and when you're practicing writing, imitating other writers, the way they write, the structure with which they use, that can be a really fun way too to get you to write and get you in the habit without it feeling so personal and like you yet have to find your voice and all this pressure. Trying to do it like somebody else with that intention, it's different than copying. It's different than plagiarism. That's like a creative exercise. Let me try to mimic this person's style. The point of the exercise is to mimic them. How well can I mimic them? That could be a fun idea. I feel like we definitely did stuff like that in like creative writing classes in college. All right, next question, all about getting started. I feel like I don't have any creativity left after 5 years out of practice because I was bedbound. I have no idea where to start now that I'm feeling better, but every time I try, it feels pointless. I'm so glad that you're feeling better. I'm so glad you're physically feeling better. I think it's so hard to find our creativity again, to find our authentic artistic voice when it has been put to bed, for lack of a better word, when it's been gone for a while, sometimes for circumstances outside of our control. I wonder, this is something I've been actually thinking about in my life and that I realized was a blocker for me too. If you were bedbound for 5 years, I imagine that there are a whole list of emotional complications that have come up from this outside of if this was if there were any physical manifestations of this. Like outside of the physical piece, the emotional piece is a whole other one to deal with. And I wonder if there's a part of you that's like thinking back to your life before you had your illness, before you were sick. If you are trying to be her again, if you're trying to be that person, or if you're comparing yourself to who you were before this happened. I sometimes notice in my creative work that subconsciously I've been trying to get back. I've been trying to be this version of myself that honestly died a while ago, or a part of me that I can never get back to because I've grown. But when I was trying to be like her, I was denying the part of myself that has grown and learned things. I was denying that part of my artistic voice. And I wonder if part of your journey now in reclaiming and refinding your artistic voice is realizing that who you were before this happened, parts of her are gone, but parts of you are still there. You've been transformed. And I'm sure there are parts of this that you wish you had done without, but it happened. The last 5 years happened, and your creative voice wants to come out again. She wants to come out again, but she wants you to acknowledge that she's changed and that she's grown. And I think that's what your task is. It's like, who are you now? The The creative you now, the entire you now, is going to look different than the person you were before. And trying to go back in time to be exactly her and to create in the exact same way that you created then, it's like a fruitless task. It's never going to lead you to where you need to go, where you're meant to go, because you're meant to be creative. You're meant to share your voice. And that's true for all of us. Sometimes we have this like idea of ourselves that are in our heyday, and the reasons we think that was us at our most successful are like completely, subjective and will vary from person to person. But the most creative and the best thing we can make is the next thing. It's us in the future. We are always going to improve, and we are always the act of the journey of finding our voice, finding our purpose. That is a forever game, you guys. And I feel so much, freedom, and I feel such a burden off my shoulders when I recognize that. Like the person I was before, I love her. She got me here, but I don't need to be her anymore. I'm supposed to have grown. You're supposed to have grown. Trying isn't pointless. I know that when your creativity feels so far away, it feels pointless to try because you sit down and it's hard and you're frustrated. It's not pointless. It's going to come back. You have to be deliberate, though, about sticking with it, even when it feels like nothing's happening, even when it feels like you're not being rewarded. You are. The reward comes from sitting down every day and trying and failing. But that's where the reward comes. I promise you. When I take weeks, months off my writing, the first week is fucking brutal. And just like you're saying, it feels pointless. I do not see a light at the end of the tunnel. I will sit there, and sometimes I'll sit at my desk for 40 minutes and nothing will happen. But you know what? Then I do it again the next day. And maybe it's like 35 minutes of pointlessness instead of the full 40. And then I do it the next day and it still feels pretty fucking pointless. But you know what? On day 4, I feel kind of excited to sit back down because last night when I was in bed, I had an idea and I wrote it down quickly before I fell asleep. And now today, it might still be hard, but I have some momentum. Momentum finds us when we've been working. And working doesn't mean creating anything necessarily, but it means taking a seat. It means taking a seat, listening to what's going on in our head, being willing to sit with the pointlessness, the despair, the disappointment, and just trusting that something good is going to come. It's going to come. Don't give up on yourself. Your creativity is still within you, and it just wants you to be patient with it. Just like in any of our social relationships, we want people to be patient with us. We don't want them to give up on us when we go through a hard time. We want them to assume that even if we don't call for 2 months, we still want to be their friend. Your creativity wants to be that. Your creativity wants to be accepted by you unconditionally. Okay? Be that person for your creativity. Be that person for yourself. A good segue from this question. Now we're going to move into questions about being seen as an artist by yourself. Because yes, being seen by others is an important piece of this that we'll get to soon. But, we have to accept ourselves for the artists and writers that we are. And that takes some time. So the first question is, I just wrote a children's book and had so much fun doing it, but I hesitate to call myself an aspiring writer or even just a writer. At what point can you call yourself a writer? It's so funny. I've struggled with calling myself a writer for a really long time. And I now do. Like when people ask me what I do, I say that I'm a writer. And I've recently been kind of questioning whether, just like you, I'm like, can I even say that? Can I even say I'm a writer if I'm spending most of my time making this podcast or writing in private? Like, do people think I'm a writer? I think you can call yourself a writer when you are a person who writes. I don't think that writers are just published writers. I think that, for example, there are people who publish their first novel in their 60s, but they've been writing books the whole time. They've been working other jobs, but they've been writing novels the whole time. Did they just become a writer at 60? Maybe they just became a published author at 60, but they've been a writer the whole time because a writer is not an occupation. A writer is a way of living. Like a writer is an identity. It's different than other jobs. A writer is an artist. It is a piece of you. So my answer is you can call yourself a writer whenever it is you feel ready to, but I think you have to start calling yourself a writer before you feel ready. I think you have to just start practicing, and it's going to feel uncomfortable. Like now that I have Francis, my dog, I'm chatting with a lot more people on the street in my neighborhood who have dogs. And sometimes when we've been chatting for a long time, they'll ask what I do. And I say I'm a writer. I take a deep breath and I say it. And they, of course, ask me what I write. And I still feel uncomfortable and a little bit of imposter syndrome when I say, oh, I write for myself. I write an advice column. There's imposter syndrome there. I feel a little bit of a fraud because I know that I haven't really been writing my advice column. So can I even claim that anymore? There's that piece of it. And then there's just the imposter syndrome that comes up of like, oh, you write for yourself? Like who? Cool. What? Like loser. Who does she think she is taking up space? That comes up for me, but I'm practicing it anyway. And I want you to practice it anyway too. All right, next question. I've been a writer in quotes, all my life, but now that I'm in my late 20s, I feel so inhibited by my analytical brain. I haven't shown my creative writing to anyone since I was about 17, and it makes me a little sad. I think I probably have something to say somewhere deep down in my chest. How do I tap into that again? Oh gosh, I think this is so relatable. So many of us sort of kill our artistic dreams and our, the whimsy of our inner child when we go to college, and then it kind of dies in our 20s as we're getting used to like adulting and being in the corporate world. You said that I haven't shown my creative writing to anyone since I was 17. I'm curious if that means you're still creating it. Because if you're still creating it, I want you at least to celebrate the fact that you are still creating. And if you're not, don't blame yourself. But creating is just as important as showing it. So if you are still creating, like that's a huge win. The fact that you've still been creating this time, even inconsistently, I think is something to be really proud of. And another thing I want to call out is like, if you feel sad that you haven't shared your writing or that you haven't been in that practice of creating and sharing, that cycle, that beautiful cycle, if that makes you feel sad, or if considering that makes you feel like you're wasting your life in some way, or you feel like, oh man, like I think there's something more I can give. If you feel any of that, you are probably a writer. You're probably an artist. I don't think everybody feels that way. I think everybody feels a sense of wanting a purpose and wanting to feel connected to their. Does everybody feel this way? I don't know. I actually have met some people who don't seem to care about this at all. But a lot of people do care about having a purpose, wanting to feel like their choices have meaning, wanting to feel connected to the minutia of their lives. But if you specifically are like, man, I used to make stuff and I loved making stuff and now I don't. And that kind of feels like a waste. That makes me sad. Like you have to make stuff and you have to share it. I think when I was in my 20s, I really felt this. I was a teacher first out of school. I did Teach for America. And there was so much that I loved about that job. And there's so much about teaching that I think I've brought with me in interesting ways into the work that I'm doing now. But there's also a lot that didn't work for me. Like I found the job to be unsustainable and I couldn't be the best teacher I could be. I didn't have the patience required to be a really good teacher. So I made a transition, but I also made the transition because I deeply wanted to be a writer. I wanted to get back like you to my artistic roots. I was an artist in high school and I was a creative writer and artist in college and I wanted to do that again. But I started working in media and that introduced a different set of problems because now I was writing and I was creating stuff, but I was writing and creating stuff like in someone else's voice, under kind of a corporate banner. And what I did sporadically throughout my early 20s was take creative writing classes. And I thought that was a really great way to get me kind of to spark that feeling again, to help give me a little bit of accountability to get back to that place in myself. I did some online classes at Catapult. Catapult I think that was the workshop that I did. They have a lot of great classes online. I did one night class in person one night. I think doing stuff like that can be really great. I think you tap into it first by really claiming that you want to tap into this again and realizing that that's going to come with some changes. You don't just tap into your creative self and your inner artist. Like you don't just start making and sharing things again because you think about it. That is the first step, but you have to realize like, okay, I want this, and so I'm now going to make a change in my life to achieve it. It could mean creating time in the morning or at night or on the weekend where you allow yourself to be this artistic self. Maybe you go take one random pottery class with a friend. It doesn't need to be your entryway back into your creative self. It doesn't need to be through writing. It can be something else that just kind of taps into that youthfulness, the making things for no purpose, making things for no ROI, just making things for fun. It could be, I think making a mood board is really fun. I've actually been wanting to make like a big bulletin board back in my, if you're watching the YouTube version or watching the video, you can see I'm pointing. I've wanted to get like a gigantic bulletin board and make a cool mood board of like Hello Haze things or visuals and imagery and colors and patterns that resonate with what I'm working on right now and what I'm sharing with all of you. And then I can change it a couple times a year. That's not writing, but it is tapping into my artistic center. And maybe a project like that would be fun for you. Make some sort of visual mood board of the person, of your former self that you want to bring back, of the you want to step into and the you want to become. Like, what does she look like in colors and patterns and text? I don't know. An idea like that could be a great way to get started. Okay, the next question is, I always complete my art projects when they're gifts, but I struggle to finish when they're for myself. Thoughts? Oh, do I have thoughts? Do I have thoughts? I imagine that you do that because you don't think that making art for yourself is a worthwhile use of your time. You probably are trying to justify it. Making something for somebody else feels worthwhile because you're giving something to them. But art for myself, what's the point? What's the point? I could be doing better things. I could be working. I could be providing value. I could be being of service. I could be making money. I could be getting something done. I could be checking an item off my to-do list. Listen, baby, you can always find an excuse to not make your art. There's always going to be more excuses, just like there's always more work to do. If you've been avoiding it, and if you find yourself willing to do it for others, but not willing to do it for yourself, you gotta say, that's because I'm not prioritizing myself. For some reason, I don't think I'm worth it. And I want you to ask yourself why. Who is that voice? Where is that voice coming from? Why do you think that your art is not a worthwhile use of your time? For you. It is. There's nothing more worthwhile. It fuels everything else. When you prioritize your creation and when you give yourself that gift of like making stuff for fun for you, I don't know, I see a positive ripple effect everywhere else. You have more time for everything else because you've taken a little time for yourself. Now we're going to talk about being seen by others, the last piece of the getting started puzzle. So the first question we're going to start off kind of a little more surface level. I want to share my writing publicly, but I don't know where to start. Do you have any suggestions or resources? In general, I feel like I'm kind of skeptical of like resources of like how to grow an audience or how to do XYZ. Because ultimately, like you're going to have to find out what works best for you. And there's no rule book. I want to resist the idea that there's one way to share your work. There are so many ways to share your work, and the only way that's going to actually work for you to help you accomplish your goals is the one that you come up with and the one that you really custom and tailor make to you. I do think that social media is an amazing way to practice sharing your work, and you don't need to share your writing on the page that you use to submit this question on Instagram, for example. Make another account that you don't need to share with anybody, but you can simply get in the practice of taking the poem you wrote, for example, going on Canva. Canva is a free design tool that I use for everything I make, all my thumbnails, any graphic you see, Canva. Practice going on Canva, adding your poem there, exporting it, putting it up on your Instagram. Maybe you put the poem up and you're like, okay, I actually want to make a cool carousel. So what are some visuals that I feel capture the energy of this poem? Maybe they don't it can be random. Maybe I want to look in some coffee table books and take some pictures of those that I feel like capture the mood of the poem. And now I'm going to post it. And I'm not going to give this account to anybody. So it might get 0 likes. It might get 1 like. Who cares? Right now, I'm just practicing making something and posting it. Making something and posting it. I think we think so much about social media as like growing an audience. And I think can be helpful for that if that's part of your goals and you do want to build a readership for your work. But it's also just like such an easy, it's an in your fingertips way to practice that cycle of making and posting and making and sharing and making and sharing. And that to me is such a gift that we have that. There is something to be said about making things in private and just like keeping them in your folder and keeping them in your journal and they never see the light of day, sure. But I do think growth as an artist and a writer does come from making it, saying it's done, putting it to bed and putting it out there and then moving on to the next thing. That's how you get better. That really is how you get better. So if I wanted to share my work publicly, that's 100% where I would start. I would download an account on Instagram or on Substack or wherever. Probably one of those two, actually. I don't know if I would do TikTok unless you wanted to read your writing like I sometimes do. I would start there and just do it. Just go through those steps I said and just post it. So that's like the tactical question about being seen, like how do I literally share it? But the next two questions address the deeper layers that I think are really what trip us up. So someone asked me, how do you deal with the fear of writing about things in your life, knowing people you love would read it? And more broadly, how do you deal with the fear and risk and vulnerability that comes with publishing to your audience? Okay. So I'll answer the first part of that first, the fear of writing about things that people I love would read. This is something that I still struggle with sometimes and think about a lot, but something I've learned that I try to take with me is to have trust in myself that when I write about people I love, that I am doing it in an honest but loving way. I personally am not going to write about things that I am coming to from a place of anger yet. And something that, I've talked about with my therapist by pulling some examples of when I've written about things and then I've received feedback from people I love or notes from people I love. Like it actually can be a gift to write about things that involve people you love, like to write about it in a healing and positive way where there was some like lesson attached. It almost gives other people permission to like heal too. Like you, by being a brave writer and by sharing your experience and your story, showing acceptance of it, it's actually a gift to others too. It's a gift to people who don't know you by getting to learn from your experience, and it's a gift too to the people who do know you. So I try to think about it through that lens, and like I'm able to do that because I have trust in myself that I can make the right choices when I'm writing and editing and choosing what to publish. There are times when I don't publish something because I'm like, I'm not sure about that, or I don't feel ready to do that. And that's within my control. I feel like writers often, they view their life as copy. They view their life as material. And I absolutely do as well. And I think that when you become a person in my life, you sort of learn that you might show up in my writing. And I hope that the people trust that I will be delicate with that. And I take that responsibility seriously. But I'm going to write about my life and the characters in it. I could talk a lot about that. But there's fear. I will say that I have been very pleasantly surprised, and I have found it incredibly healing when I have written things and didn't get the scary, sad response I thought I was going to. In fact, when people tell me they're proud of me after I publish something that I was nervous about, it's really, really touching. Even like with my siblings, like sometimes I'll write about our parents' divorce, for example, and it's not really something that we talk about a ton with each other because it's hard. And sometimes I would get nervous about just like not wanting to, my eyes are welling up again, like just like not wanting to stir up anything for them. But then when I get notes from like my sister telling me how proud she is of me and how much it meant to her to read that, and that means something. So I want you, if you're scared of writing about something personal because of what other people will think, like you might be healing them too through your words. Don't just think it's going to be a bad thing. And then dealing with the fear and risk and vulnerability of publishing to an audience. I think sometimes the best way to deal with like fear about publishing to an audience is to not actually think about the audience that's there and to really feel good about the process of making something before it ever hits an audience. I think that can really help because when you know that it's been meaningful and truthful and you feel good about it yourself, it kind of helps dissipate. What's the word I'm looking for? It helps all that fear just become a little bit less intense. That said, I don't really know how do I deal with it? It's funny because there's some stuff that maybe you've heard me talk about or write about that you're like, wow, that's really vulnerable, but it actually doesn't feel that vulnerable to me because there's other stuff that feels so much more vulnerable that I'd be so much more scared to touch. And I think it's important to remember that you always have control over what you share and what you don't share. My goal, like one of my goals for myself, is to be more honest with my work. Something that I think really hurt my process with making Hello Haze over the last year and a half is that as I started to get closer to like some of the pain that I sit with and that I hold, I became much more protective of not wanting to share it because it was so hard for me to process myself. So really, like, how could I even talk about it when it's so hard to process myself? And the effect of that is that I began engaging with my work in a way that didn't feel truly honest and authentic to me. And as I reclaim my artist and reclaim my writer self this summer and now, like, I really want to be more honest. Now, being more honest for me with my work is going to look different than what being honest with your work looks like for you. But I guess my point in saying all of that is like, it's a spectrum. And you never need to be as vulnerable. You never need to be vulnerable when you're not ready. And there's always going to be something that you're not yet ready to be vulnerable with, you know? So baby steps. And really challenging the voice when it comes up, where I start trying to make decisions based on how I think someone else will react. And once I noticed that I had developed that habit, or that I was doing it, I became better at recognizing when the voice was there. Because sometimes I don't notice when I'm doing that. I'm just like in autopilot and I'm just making things and I'm like, oh my God, a whole week could go by and I've made this whole plan that isn't really aligned with my most authentic voice because I was imagining other people's opinions too much. Once I became aware of that, I've gotten a little bit better at challenging it. I'll keep you posted though on how I do with that. I've made so much progress though over the last year on this, and I'm proud of myself for that. So as I continue to get better at it, I'll keep sharing thoughts with you. It also though is okay to care about other people's opinions. I think it can be really helpful to have a few opinions, like to have people in your inner circle who you can share your work with and their opinions you can trust. That's actually key. It's so much easier to not care about everyone's opinion when you know whose opinion to care about. So like I have a inner circle, I care about their opinion. Everybody else, maybe I'll entertain it if you give me a good reason to. But otherwise, like, no, I don't care about your opinion because you're not involved in my inner circle. You're not involved in my life. And I have enough people who I know who do give me good constructive criticism and who do support me so that I don't actually need your opinions. When you don't have that kind of rock solid foundation around you, of course, you're going to pay attention to everybody else's opinion. We all need feedback. We all need support. We all need criticism. So asking those people for their thoughts and being kind of prepared to receive whatever it is they say, I think that's really helpful too, both on not being reliant on other people's opinions, but also in growing the courage to share your work. Because then when you share it, no matter what happens, you have these people by your side. So that is a wrap on our first episode of this creative process series. Today we talked all about getting started, and I really hope you liked this because I'm going to make 4 of them. I'm going to make 4 of them. I don't know yet if part 2 will be the next episode. It might be in a couple of weeks. We'll see, but they'll definitely all come out over the course of this summer. Our next episode, as of now, is about the routine, like the practice of being a writer and being an artist. And we're going to get into all like the questions about habits and just what it actually looks like to be a practicing writer. Part 3 is focused on the question of, is it good enough? Am I good enough? Is my work good enough to warrant my time? Is it good enough to warrant an audience? We'll cover themes of imposter syndrome, perfectionism, the revision and feedback process, which is so important and one of my favorite parts of this to talk about. Part 4, I want to cover finding meaning, like how we find our unique voice, how we say something that matters, how we move beyond ourselves, like how we write about ourselves, but in a way that it touches and relates to others. We'll cover all of that. If you're interested, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye.